If you're new to growing mushrooms at home, start with the bucket method. It's one of the simplest and most economical ways to grow your own oyster mushrooms. No fancy equipment, expensive substrates, or sterile lab conditions required. All you need is a reusable bucket, some oyster mushroom spawn, a bale of mulch, and some hydrated lime. It's cheap, beginner friendly, and because you can use the bucket again and again, there are no single-use plastic grow bags. Simple, sustainable, and a great first step into growing your own mushrooms. Let's get started.
So to grow great oyster mushrooms at home is super simple, and I'm going to go through all the components you need to do that at home. We do sell all of it together as a bundle on our website, so you might already have that bundle and you're going to follow along. If not, you can acquire all of these products really easily yourself. The four main principles around growing oyster mushrooms at home is we need a vessel, we need substrate to go into that vessel, we need to be able to clean that substrate, and we also need our mushroom spawn. So to get started, here we have a 5 litre bucket. 5 litre bucket is a really great size, but you can go as large as you want as well. So here we have the bucket that we're using, and we need to have holes around the outside for this is where the mushrooms are going to be growing from. And I've drilled these holes with a step down drill bit to not crack the plastic. And you can see here we've got around a 15mm hole, and that's a great size because what we're going to be doing is putting some tape over those holes there to protect them, and we want to make sure that the holes are large enough to allow a great flush of mushrooms to come out, but also not too big that the substrate is going to dry out. So I've got 3 holes around the outside of this bucket. So the larger your container, the more holes you can put in, but I would recommend around 3 holes in a container of this size. So we've got the container. We also have here a small brewer's bag, and this is where we're going to put our substrate, because what we're needing to do is we're needing to soak our substrate overnight. And so we're basically making a tea bag, and we're going to soak that in a bucket of water with some hydrated lime that we're going to add to that. But you need something to be able to soak your material in, and we're going to be using sugarcane, but you can also use chopped straw or hemp fibre, things like that. And you don't need to go out and get a fancy brewer's bag. You can use a pillowcase or a coffee sack, Hessian sack, anything that's basically allowing you to put your substrate in and then soaking that in the water. So we've got that as well. We've also got over here some hydrated lime. And so this is what is going to allow us to clean our substrate. So the substrate that we're going to be using is sugarcane mulch here. So this sugarcane mulch, you can just get something like this straight from your nursery or hardware store. And when we open this bag up, inside that sugarcane mulch, or if you're using chopped straw or hemp fibre, whatever you're going to use, it's going to have mold and bacteria spores on that sugarcane or substrate. And we need to be able to remove those, because when we're growing the mushrooms in this bucket, we want to make it so that it's a great environment for the mycelium to be growing, and just mushrooms are going to be forming inside this bucket, and we don't want to have bacteria and molds also forming. So a great way to clean this substrate is using hydrated lime. So hydrated lime is not garden lime. This is builder's lime essentially. So it's highly alkaline, and it's going to drive up the pH of our water. And when we add our sugarcane or chopped straw to this water, it's going to basically kill off a lot of the bacteria and mold spores because they can't handle that high alkalinity. So it's a really simple way of cleaning your substrate. Instead of using boiling water or heat to try and kill those spores off over time, we're just going to use hydrated lime, and we're going to be adding that to the water that we're going to soak our sugarcane in. We also have some isopropyl alcohol mixed with a bit of water. Okay, so this is just used down to clean out our containers with a cloth, and that's the same thing. We want to be cleaning, keep surfaces clean, keep the buckets clean, so that when we're going to add our mushroom culture into this bucket, it's got the best chance of gaining a foothold and outcompeting any microorganisms. So we want to have a clean bench. We want to be using isopropyl alcohol mixed with some water. You can also use methylated spirits or some sort of alcohol as well if you can't get a hold of isopropyl alcohol. We also have a pair of gloves, which we'll get to, and we've also got here some micropore tape. So once we've added everything into this bucket, we want to tape these holes over with some micropore tape, and that's just tape that you can get from the pharmacy. It's just breathable tape, and that allows the mushroom culture and the mycelium inside this bucket to be able to respire and breathe through these holes, but it's stopping any sort of wind-borne spores and pathogens from being able to blow into the bucket. And it's just going to give us another level of insurance so that we're going to grow some great mushrooms. And finally, the last thing that you of course need is some mushroom spawn. So this mushroom spawn comes in this bundle, but you can acquire this, you just go online and you can go and find all sorts of different varieties of oyster mushroom spawn available. This method is fantastic for oyster mushrooms, and I would really recommend that people, if they're going to try this method, to stick with oysters, because if you're going to try other varieties of mushrooms, these other varieties are not as resilient to this method. So because this method is going to be using hydrated lime and we're going to be raising the alkalinity level up high, we need a species or variety of mushroom that can really handle that high alkalinity, and oyster mushrooms can do that. Okay, other varieties such as shiitake or lion's mane or chestnut mushrooms and these other gourmet varieties really struggle with this method. And so we would say choose a variety of oyster mushroom to try, and as you get more experience, you can try other varieties in other different methodologies. So this is our mushroom spawn here. If you've never seen mushroom spawn before, it's essentially some type of grain that's been sterilized and then the mushroom culture has been added to it. So on this here we have hydrated wheat that's been sterilized over 121 degrees, and then in a laboratory we've added the mushroom culture. So these wheat grains, think of it as your mushroom seeds. So they are going to act as our inoculation points, and we're going to add these seeds to the substrate, and that's where the mushroom culture is going to grow through the sugarcane mulch. So this is just the mushroom culture growing on the seeds here in this bag. So the first thing we need to do is to work out how much substrate is going to fit inside our vessel. And so the best way to do this is just do a mock fill up. So we're just going to fill up some sugarcane in here to see how much we need to be putting into this brewer's bag. So we have our sugarcane bale here. And if you're going to go to the shops and buy some sugarcane, it's best to find a bag that's got no nicks or holes in it, because if it does, it could have some moisture that's gotten into that bag, and you could have other types of molds growing inside that, and that's just going to set us off to a bad start. So you want your substrate to be nice and clean to start with. And so we've got some nice clean dry sugarcane here. And so what I'm going to do is just fill this bucket up. And don't worry about having to clean this yet. We're going to get to that point after we've soaked our sugarcane. So fill this up. And so that's roughly how much sugarcane we're going to need for soaking. And so now that we know that, we can just put this sugarcane straight into this brewer's bag here. And like I said, if you don't have a brewer's bag, anything that holds the substrate is going to work well. Pillowcase is a great thing to use. So once we've got the sugarcane in here, we can put the bucket to the side, and this one here has a little drawstring on top, so we can use that to tie it closed. Okay, and so this is our little tea bag that we've made, and now we're going to have to clean that substrate. So we're going to be using our hydrated lime, like I said, and we need another bucket with some clean water in there that we're going to add the hydrated lime to. So when we're adding our hydrated lime to the bucket of water, I would recommend just a couple of spoonfuls of hydrated lime is all you need to the water. It's highly alkaline, and don't worry about having to weigh it out or measure it, because you can't over lime your water. Okay? and you'll get water that has a milky appearance. And so now that we've got that mixed in, we can soak our sugar cane. So pop that into the water, and we want to weigh it down with something. I found that here, but you could just use a brick. Anything that sort of can hold that sugar cane under the surface of the water is going to be great. And you want to have that sit not only just for a couple of hours, we would recommend overnight. So I'm going to leave this to sit overnight, and at that point the sugar cane has been sitting in the highly alkaline water and it's going to have cleaned itself. And then we're going to come back once that's happened and we're going to spread that out, and we're going to go on to the next process. Okay, it's the next day and we have soaked our sugarcane tea bag overnight. And a few hours ago, I took it out of the solution and I hung it up on the clothesline, which is a simple way to let it drip dry, because we want to let the excess moisture come out of the sugarcane mulch. But now what's inside here is pasteurized sugarcane mulch ready for our mushroom spawn. So from this point, we need to be careful and keep our surfaces clean and our hands clean. So I'm just going to put that to one side, and we just want to clean down any surfaces where we're going to be putting out our sugar cane and putting our mushroom spawn on, because we don't want any molds or bacteria to come back into the area. So with a clean cloth and some isopropyl alcohol, you can just give your workstation a clean. And we want to be working relatively quickly because there's obviously pathogens in the air that are going to land on our sugarcane mulch. But if we work in a timely manner, it should be all okay. So if you've got a pair of gloves, pop a pair of gloves on as well. Otherwise, clean down your hands really, really well. Give your hands a spray. And we've got our surfaces clean here. We've got our pasteurized sugarcane in our bucket. We've also got our bucket that it's going to go into. We want to make sure that is also being cleaned. So open up that. Give that a spray as well with some isopropyl alcohol, and give that a nice wipe down. And same for the lid. So once we've done that, we've got our sugarcane here, and we can pop it out on the table. So you can see it's changed colour slightly. Pop that to the side. And now we've got our sugarcane mulch. So we just want to layer that down. And it's still moist, okay? If you squeeze it and it's dripping with a lot of water, it means it's too moist, okay? So we want to have some moisture in there for the mycelium to grow, but not too much. And that's why letting it to drip dry for a couple of hours is important, but don't let it drip dry all day long because you'll dry out the substrate too much. So the next step is some mushroom spawn. This is around, I weighed that and it was around 1.2 kilos with the water added to it. So for around that amount, we would recommend around 200 grams of mushroom spawn. So with a clean knife, open up a packet of spawn, and you just want to sprinkle that over. And you want to give that a brief mix in. And these are all the inoculation points of the mycelium. And this wheat grain is also acting as a nutrient. So this is a great mix, really simple. And of course, we don't want to just let it sit around for a long time. So we want to get it into this bucket. And all you have to do is just pack it in. And you want to get all of it in, because all of this is going to be food for the mycelium, and the more food there is, the more mushrooms you're going to grow. So pack it in like that. We would recommend to not compact it as much as possible so that you have a gap of air on top. If you form a big gap on top of the bucket, mushroom pins probably going to start forming in there, and you might get mushrooms fruiting in the top. And what we want to do is encourage them to come out these holes. So bring your substrate up to the top so it's level, and then you can pop your lid on. And then all there is left to do now is to cover up these holes to stop anything blowing in. So I'll just take my gloves off, and we've got some micropore tape here. So a little bit of micropore tape stuck onto these holes is just going to protect those holes from anything generally going to come in contact with that substrate, but it's also going to stop evaporation. So stopping the evaporation is going to stop those holes from drying out, which can lead to mushrooms not wanting to form there. So once we've done that, that's it. That's a really simple bucket. And now the next step is to let that mycelium grow. So we're going to have to go and find a great area for incubation. So for the incubation phase, we want to find the best area for letting this mycelium grow through the sugarcane. And this is going to depend on the time of year. So for us at the moment, it's quite cool. So we want to find a warm spot. But if you're in summertime, you'll want to try and find a cooler spot. So generally, just general room temperature is great for allowing oyster mushroom mycelium to grow well. And so around that 20 to 25 degree range is ideal. If it's cooler than that, the mycelium will just grow a little bit slower. But you really don't want it to be really hot, like over 30 degrees, because the mycelium will get really stressed out. So find a nice spot that you feel comfortable in and pop it there, and just keep an eye on the mycelium, and we're going to check back in over the days, and we're going to see how this bucket develops. So we're back with our bucket, and we're on day 10 now, and you can see that the sugarcane has gotten a lot more white, and so that's all the mycelium being consuming the sugarcane mulch, and we're finally getting some action. You can see here that where we put our micropore tape, we're getting some little baby mushrooms starting to form underneath the pin set here. So this is occurring at around day 10 for us. And so this is the most crucial time now, is when these mushrooms are going to start forming. We need to be providing the humidity to allow these mushrooms to grow into a great cluster. So what we're going to do here is peel off these stickers, and they'll just come straight off like this. And you can see under here we've got some mushrooms that have formed. And now all we need to be doing is using a spray bottle, because we need to be providing humidity. So we want to be misting these mushrooms and to be providing humidity for these mushrooms to develop. This is the most crucial time in growing mushrooms out of a bucket like this. So you might want to be using a shotgun fruiting chamber is another way you can provide humidity, and we have another video about how to make something like that on our YouTube page. But you can also put this bucket into a tent with a humidifier, or you can simply just spray it with a spray bottle. And so it depends on how much relative humidity you have in the air, what time of year you're doing it. If it's really dry conditions, it'll need regular misting throughout the day. If it's raining outside, the relative humidity will be higher. So you just want to be able to provide enough humidity. So when it looks like it's getting a little bit dry around the holes, give it a spray. And you'll start to see mushrooms doubling in size every day or so. So we'll see how this goes, and we'll watch how these mushrooms develop. So our oyster mushroom bucket is ready to harvest. As you can see, we've got a nice bunch of oyster mushrooms forming on the side. And this is the ideal time to harvest these mushrooms because the caps are turned downwards. Over the next day or so, they'll turn their caps up and it will release spores. So if that happens, it's not an issue. It'll just form a bit of a white powder around the bottom of your bucket. You can just clean it up with water. But we like to harvest them before the spores have dropped, and this is the ideal time. So to harvest your mushrooms from a bucket like this, we don't use a knife. All we do is just grab the bunch and we just pull and twist
and you'll get the mushrooms coming off like this. Now, we get a little bit of mushroom coming out like that. And the reason we don't want to use a knife is if you use a knife, you will cut some of the stem off and it will plug up the hole. And we want to get more flushes of mushrooms to come out. So twisting it off is totally fine. If a bit of substrate does pull out of the hole, not an issue. And now these guys are ready to eat, so we'll enjoy those. And if we look on this bucket, we've got some more little mushrooms forming on the side here, so we can let those grow out with the spray bottle. So this bucket will produce multiple flushes of mushrooms, but eventually it will be exhausted and all the moisture from the substrate has gone into the bunches of mushrooms that are formed on the outside of the bucket. And at that stage, we can rest the bucket and you might get some more pins forming. Otherwise, we can just open this up and this mulch we can just put into our garden bed and we can reuse this bucket and use the method over and over again. This is the cheapest and easiest way to produce oyster mushrooms at home. And if you do a couple of buckets a week and have a bunch of them at different stages, you'll have a regular supply of gourmet mushrooms in your own home. And it's not just these white mushrooms that you can be producing at home. You can choose a range of different oyster mushrooms like pink oyster and gold oyster as well. And so you can be growing them at all times of the year and enjoying some really great produce yourself at home.